Assalamu alaikum students. So today we are starting lectures on neuroanatomy. The human body consists of numerous tissues and organs that are diverse in structure and function, yet they function together and in harmony for the well-being of the body as a whole. It is obvious that there has to be some kind of influence that monitors and controls the working of different parts of the body. Although there are other mechanisms that help in such control, for example hormones, the overwhelming role in directing the activities of body rests with the nervous system. So neuroanatomy is the study of structural aspects of the nervous system. It cannot be emphasized too strongly that the study of structure is meaningless unless correlated with the function. So the division of a study of nervous system into neuroanatomy and neurophysiology is only a matter of convenience. So we will study the function and the structure simultaneously, and along with it we will correlate them with the clinical anatomy. The nervous system may be divided into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So central nervous system, it consists of brain and the spinal cord. The brain, which receives and processes the sensory information, initiates responses, stores memories and generates thoughts and emotions, while the spinal cord, it conducts these signals to and from the brain and controls the reflex activities. While in the peripheral nervous system, you know that there are motor neurons and the sensory neurons. Motor neurons, they are CNS to they convey impulses from CNS to muscles and glands, while sensory neurons, they convey impulses from sensory organs to the CNS. Now the motor nervous system, it consists of somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. So somatic nervous system, it controls the voluntary movements, while autonomic nervous system controls involuntary responses. And thus this autonomic nervous system has two branches further: sympathetic division, which acts in fight or flight, and parasympathetic division, which acts in rest or digest. So today we will study the spinal cord, the structure of the spinal cord. Now before studying the structure of spinal cord, I will tell you how neuroanatomy is studied. The study of neuroanatomy begins with the study of those features of the brain and spinal cord and the nerves attached to them that can be seen with the naked eye. This is the study of gross features. It includes the study of surface features of the brain and spinal cord, that is the external features, and the coarse relations and distribution of the peripheral nerves. Some details of internal structure of the brain and spinal cord can be made out with the naked eye. However, the study of internal structure depends mainly on microscopic examination. Again, some details of structure can be made out using ordinary histological methods, but the greater part of information about the nervous system has been obtained using specialized methods. In recent years, such studies have increasingly involved the use of histochemical methods and the study of tissues under the higher magnifications possible only with an electron microscope. So today we will study the spinal cord. So learning objectives of this lecture is that at the end of this lecture you should be able to describe the location of the spinal cord, that is in the vertebral canal, which is present in the which is the part of the vertebral column. So what is the composition of vertebral column, what are the joints of vertebral column, and what are their clinical significance, clinical relevance to the spinal cord because of location of the spinal cord, immediate location of the spinal cord in the vicinity of the vertebral canal or the vertebral column, and their pathologies can affect the spinal cord. The second learning objective is that you should be able to know the external features of the spinal cord, its extent, size, external structure, segments and nerve roots attached. Third learning objective is you should be able to identify the various meningeal coverings and space in between them and their clinical significance. So the spinal cord together with the spinal nerves and surrounding meninges are contained in the cavity of the vertebral canal, which lies in the vertebral column. So this is the vertebral column and this is the vertebral canal formed by the various vertebral foramen, and the spinal cord is contained in them. So the vertebral column is the central bony pillar of the body. It supports the skull, pectoral girdle, upper limbs and the thoracic cage, and by way of the pelvic girdle transmits body weight to the lower limbs. Now what is the composition of this vertebral column? So composition of vertebral column is that it is made up of 33 vertebrae. The vertebral column is composed of 33 vertebrae, 7 cervical, you can see here, 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar and 5 sacral, and then 4 coccygeal. The lower 3 of the coccygeal vertebra are fused. Because it is segmented and made up of vertebra, joints and pads of fibrocartilage called intervertebral disc, it is a flexible structure. The intervertebral disc form about 1/4 of the length of the vertebral column. So this is the slide showing the typical vertebra. This is the cervical vertebra and it's showing the various parts in relation to the spinal cord. So in this slide we will study briefly the various parts of the vertebra in relation to the spinal cord. So although vertebra show regional differences, they all possess a common pattern. A typical vertebra consists of rounded body anteriorly and a vertebral arch posteriorly. So this is the posterior part, this is the anterior part. They enclose a space called the vertebral foramen. So this is the vertebral foramen through which run the spinal cord and its coverings. The vertebral arch consists of a pair of cylindrical pedicles. This area is known as pedicles, which form the sides of the arch, and a pair of flattened laminae which complete the arch posteriorly. The vertebral arch gives rise to 7 processes: 1 spinous, 2 transverse and 4 articular. 1 spinous, 2 transverse and 4 articular. Superior articular process and inferior articular process. The spinous process or spine is directed posteriorly from the junction of 2 laminae. The transverse process are directed laterally from the junction of lamina and the pedicles. Both the spinous and transverse process serve as levers and receive attachments of muscles and ligaments. The articular process are vertically arranged and consists of 2 superior and inferior process. The pedicles are notched on their upper and lower borders, forming the upper and inferior, superior and inferior vertebral notches. It is not properly shown here. So on each side, the superior notch of one vertebra and the inferior notch of adjacent vertebra together form the intervertebral foramen. Now these foramen in an articulated skeleton serve to transmit the spinal nerves and blood vessels. The anterior and posterior nerve roots of spinal nerve unite within these foramina with their coverings of dura to form the segmental nerves. So you can see here the segmental nerve, the anterior and posterior nerve roots, they are uniting together to form the spinal nerve and going through the intervertebral foramen. So joints of the vertebral column, below the axis of the vertebra, the vertebra articulate with each other by means of cartilaginous joints between their bodies and by synovial joints between their articular process. So joints between two vertebral bodies sandwiched between the vertebral bodies is an intervertebral disc of fibrocartilage. So you can see here, this is the joint between the two vertebral bodies, and lying in between is the disc of fibrocartilage. Now this intervertebral disc is very important, because in old age it can get teared and its central portion can get out into the vertebral canal and can press the nerves or the spinal cord. The second joint is the articular process, joints between the two vertebral arches. The joints between the two vertebral arches consist of synovial joints between the superior and inferior articular process of adjacent vertebra. So you can see here, this is the one of the joint of the between the two vertebral arches. So external features of spinal cord. Now the spinal cord is roughly cylindrical in shape, and it begins superiorly at the foramen magnum in the skull, where it is continuous with the medulla oblongata of the brain, and it terminates inferiorly in the adult at the level of lower border of the first lumbar vertebra, and in the newborn it ends at the upper border of L3 vertebra. Now thus it occupies the upper 2/3 of the vertebral column of vertebral canal of the vertebral column and is surrounded by meninges, the dura mater, the arachnoid mater and the pia mater. Further protection is provided by the cerebrospinal fluid. It surrounds the spinal cord in the subarachnoid space. In the cervical region, where it gives origin to the brachial plexus, and in the lower thoracic and lumbar region, where it gives origin to the lumbosacral plexus, the spinal cord is fusiformly enlarged. The enlargements are referred to as cervical and lumbar enlargements. So this is the picture of spinal cord. Now you can see here that it is continuous above with the medulla oblongata in the skull, and inferiorly in the adult it lies at the level of lower border of L1 vertebra. Now it is covered by the meninges, and you can see here the cervical enlargement and the lumbar enlargement, and its shape, cylindrical shape. Okay, so distal end of the spinal cord, it tapers off into a conical structure known as conus medullaris. Conus medullaris. This is the distal end of the spinal cord, and you know it lies at the lower border of L1 vertebra. In early fetal life, the spinal cord is as long as the vertebral canal, and each spinal nerve arises from the cord at the level of corresponding intervertebral foramen. In subsequent development of spinal cord does not grow as much as the vertebral column, and its lower end therefore gradually ascends to reach the level of third lumbar vertebra at the time of birth, and to the lower border of first lumbar vertebra in the adult. As a result of this upward migration of the cord, the roots of the spinal nerves have to follow in oblique course to reach the appropriate intervertebral foramen. This also makes the roots longer. The obliquity and length of the roots is most marked in the lower nerves, and many of these roots occupy the vertebral canal below the level of spinal cord. These roots constitutes the cauda equina. So you can see here, this is the cauda equina. These are the roots of the lower segments, and you can see here the lower segments have longer roots because they have to descend from the level of above the level of L1 vertebra to their respective intervertebral foramen to come out from the vertebral column. This is known as cauda equina. It resembles the horse tail, that's why it is known as, it's named as cauda equina. Now you can see here the cauda equina. These are the nerve roots of the lower spinal segments which are coming out, and they are like horse tail. That's why they are named as cauda equina. Now the cord, the spinal cord, it is a section of spinal cord shown here. This is the external side, and this one is the anterior part, and this is the posterior part of the posterior side of the cord. Now in the anterior side, The cord possesses a deep longitudinal fissure called the anterior median fissure in the midline anteriorly. So you can see a deep fissure is lying anteriorly and a shallow furrow called the posterior median sulcus on the posterior surface. So you can see on the posterior surface a shallow groove or furrow, but on the anteriorly a fissure is found here in the midline, median fissure. This is known as anterior median fissure and this is known as posterior median sulcus. Now along the entire length of the spinal cord are attached 31 pairs of spinal nerves by the anterior or motor root and posterior or sensory root. Each root is attached to the cord by a series of rootlets. You can see here the series of rootlets which extend the whole length of the corresponding segment of the cord. Each posterior root nerve root possesses a posterior root ganglion. So here you can see a posterior root ganglion. What is ganglion? This is a collection of nerve cells outside the central nervous system. So posterior root ganglion is lying along the posterior root of the spinal nerve, the cells of which give rise to the peripheral and central nerve fibers. So the spinal cord is made up of 31 segments, 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral and 1 coccygeal. Note that in the cervical and coccygeal regions the number of spinal segments and of spinal nerves does not correspond to the number of vertebrae. We have 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral and 4 coccygeal vertebrae. So based on the vertebrae where spinal nerves originate, the position of spinal segment and vertebra change with age. The spinal nerves originally line up with their exit point from the cord, and even after the vertebral column grows much longer, each pair of spinal nerve still exits at its original location, now several segments away. So do you understand that the spinal cord, it ends at the level of L1 vertebra. Now the spinal nerves which have to exit from their own intervertebral foramen, level of intervertebral foramen, they grow longer and then they exit from their intervertebral foramen. Like the spinal nerve S2 has to go down from the segment of the S2 segment of the spinal cord, which is lying above the level of L1 vertebra, and they have to go down and then exit from the intervertebral foramen between the S2 and S3 vertebrae. So as a result of the upward recession of the spinal cord, the spinal segments do not lie opposite the corresponding vertebrae. This fact is clinically important for estimating the position of spinal segment in relation to the surface of the body. It is important to remember that a vertebral spine is always lower than the corresponding spinal segment. As a rough guide, it may be stated that in the cervical region there is difference of one segment. That is, for example, the fifth cervical spine, it lies over the sixth cervical segment. Fifth cervical spine lies in the opposite the sixth cervical segment. In the upper thoracic region there is difference of two segments, that is fourth thoracic spine overlies the sixth thoracic segment, and in the lower thoracic region there is a difference of three segments, that is ninth thoracic spine, it lies opposite the 12th thoracic segment. The spinal cord and in lumbar region lies the T1, T11 to T12, and sacral and coccygeal region lies the L1, lies opposite the L1 level. The spinal cord is surrounded by the meninges. These are the dura mater, which ends at the S2 vertebral level. Then the arachnoid mater, it also ends at the S2 vertebral level. Then the pia mater, which ends at the L1 level. Now there are certain modifications of the pia mater. Number one is the filum terminale. This is the cord-like thick part which arises from the lower part of the conus medullaris, that is the lower part of the spinal cord, to the coccyx first vertebra. Linea splendens is the thick part of the pia mater which lies in the anterior median fissure, while ligamentum denticulata is the part of the pia mater which extends from the arachnoid mater and it gets attached to the dura mater. So this is like tooth-like pair which arises from the pia mater. It is the extension of the pia mater, tooth-like extension of the pia mater. It arises from the pia mater and then it pierces the subarachnoid mater and then goes into to be inserted into the dura mater. So here you can see the linea splendens. It is a thick cord, fibrous. It is a thickening of the pia mater. The pia mater is adherent to the surface of the spinal cord. So this is the linea splendens and this is the denticulate ligament going from the pia mater into the inserting into the dura mater, and you can see here the subarachnoid mater and then the dura mater. These spinal meninges, they protect the spinal cord, they carry the blood supply and they are continuous with the cranial meninges. Now you can see in this slide, this is the dura mater, then the arachnoid mater. Then the space between dura mater and arachnoid mater is known as subdural space, and the space between the bone and the dura mater is known as epidural space. So this is the pia mater. It is adherent to the surface of the spinal cord, and the space between the arachnoid mater and pia mater is known as subarachnoid space. Okay, so this is the filum terminale and this is the subarachnoid space, and this is the epidural space. So this subarachnoid space contains the CSF. So it is an important space from where we can perform the lumbar puncture and can aspirate this CSF fluid for chemical analysis in case of pathology.